How do you find the best possible tenants for your buy-to-let property? With property investing, especially long-term buy-to-lets, one of the key objectives is to have a tenant in there that's going to be paying you an income every month, but also looking after the property as well and not having any issues with damage or maintenance issues that are excessive. How is it that we can find the best tenants? In this video, I want to talk to you about 4 key steps that you need to follow. If you're watching my content for the first time, my name is Hussain, and on this channel we have 3 videos a week to ultimately help you in your property investing journey. So when it comes to finding the best possible tenants, one of the things we can do is use a letting agent, and I did a video recently just on setting up a letting agency if that's something interesting, because I have a number of letting agents that I'm involved in, but sometimes we don't necessarily want to use a letting agent. But make sure you watch that video, we'll link it in the description down at the bottom. Watch it after this video about how a letting agency works and the process there. But sometimes what we want to do, we want to find the tenant ourselves rather than leaving it to a letting agent to do for us. But other times it may be we're still working with the letting agent. We really want to understand what's involved in the process in finding those tenants, and maybe even help some of those, let's say, not so great letting agents out there, help them and support them a little bit to get the best tenants for you. So the first thing we need to start with, and step 1, is really about marketing the property. But before we can start marketing it, what we need to do is get a guide for what is the price going to be for your rental. Whether it's a house, it's a room in a shared HMO, it's a flat, whatever it might be, you need to be able to establish what the market rent is or what you think you're going to be able to achieve for that property. Now, of course, it's important to be realistic about this. Sometimes people have, let's say, okay or maybe slightly untidy properties, but their expectations are they're going to get the highest possible rent out there. But often that isn't the case, and this is where there's a mismatch. And sometimes also letting agents get a bad name because they've overpriced something, and that comes down to mismatching of expectations. I think it's important to be clear about what type of property you've got and who is it you're trying to attract to that property as a potential tenant. When you get that bit right, you establish the market rent, and the easiest way to do this is to have a look on the market in terms of even on the market as a website portal. You've got Rightmove, Zoopla, these various portals. You can see what else is available to rent that's very similar to what you already have. This will give you a gauge. Now, when a letting agent prices a property to rent, what they will do, they'll look at what's available in the marketplace, very similar to what I'm asking you to do right now, and also some of it will be based on their experience and knowledge as well. So the bit that they do research wise, you could do this yourself and establish what the figure is going to be. When you're marketing the property, one of the key things that you need is very good quality photographs. Now, if you've got the skills and the experience and the equipment to be able to do those photographs, then great, hey, do those yourself. But for the vast majority of people, they don't necessarily have the skill or the experience to do that. And this is where I think it's important and they're worth their weight in gold, a really good photographer who can present the property in its best possible light. Nice lighting, wide angle cameras, so that you can capture the property that's available, so the person that's viewing can really get a sense for what it is that they're potentially going to view and maybe even find as their new home going forward. So the photography is key, and I'd encourage you to find a photographer who can help you do that. And if you're stuck with that, there's many websites you can use, such as Fiverr.com or People Per Hour. These kind of websites, you can find local property photographer who can help you do that. The other part of that is also having a floor plan. These days, the floor plans are critical. Many people will decide in terms of what property they want to view because they're viewing online. They're researching for their potential property online. Gone are the days where people are pulling out newspapers every Thursday and scanning through and looking for a property to let. Those days are gone. Pretty much everything is online these days. And so you want to make sure that you're providing all the information they need. And if you think about it yourself, when you're looking at properties, one of the first things you look at is, let's have a look at that floor plan. And if the floor plan's not there, it's so frustrating. So make sure you get a floor plan. Hey, look, you could do this yourself with a piece of paper and crayons. But I'd suggest if you get a professional floor plan done, it also helps that. Now, the person doing your EPC for you often is also somebody that can do floor plans as well, so that's worth thinking about. And you can use software yourself, such as floorplanner.com, tools like that where you can build a floor plan. You can even draw it out, but as long as you've got something available there that gives a guide for somebody looking at the property in terms of what's available. So you've got great photography, you've got floor plan, and now the next step is being able to get this onto the marketplace and for people to be able to see it. there's two big platforms. It's Rightmove and Zoopla. I'm sure you already know what they are. They're the biggest property platforms where most of the agents will advertise for properties to be available to let. So if you go to a letting agent like ours or one of the others, what you would do is hand the property over to them. They'll do the photography, the floor plan, but then they'd list it on these portals because that's where the vast majority of traffic or footfall is. As I said, the newspapers are pretty much disappeared. People wandering up and down the high street, looking in the windows is also disappearing. And so it's important to have a presence online. There are some other portals as well. It's On the Market, for example, is one, and there's lots and lots of smaller ones, but the big ones are Rightmove and Zoopla. However, as an individual or a landlord, you can't advertise directly on those platforms because they're only designed for agents. They're for letting agents and estate agents. They're not designed for individuals to be able to list their property. So how do you get your property onto those portals without missing out that mass exposure? So you can use companies like, for example, UPad, Open Rent, and there's a few others as well. These companies will allow you to list your property on those platforms for you, and they generate the leads and send them on to you. Now, there are some platforms where you can advertise directly, such as Gumtree, for example, Facebook Marketplace. So it's important not to dismiss these. Sometimes it's worth thinking about who is your potential tenant that you're targeting. Who is it that you really want as a tenant? Where are they going to be looking for that next property? So for example, let's say you had a student HMO, then you're going to probably use a specialist portal that's going to be able to help you find those. And for example, we do professional tenancy in rooms. So a lot of our marketing is on Spare Room, which is the biggest portal for room rental when it comes to working tenants. Don't underestimate the power of social media. So if you have a small following or you've got friends and connections online, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, make sure you promote your property on there as well, because you don't know who's going to be seeing that may be suitable, or a referral that might come to you. So social media can give you huge exposure, so it's worth considering that as well. When you're preparing the advert, think about the wording. Now, you may not be an experienced copywriter, so think about it in a very simple way that the person reading it makes sense and is drawn into what it is that you're talking about with the property. So for example, everybody starts with, we're excited about providing this 3-bedroom property close to a city centre. It's so dull and boring. What you want to do is talk about the benefits of the property rather than the features. You list the features it will have. For example, it's got 3 bedrooms, it's got 1 bathroom, it's in city centre, etc. Those are features. But the benefits are, for example, city centre living, no commuting, best views. These are more benefits, and these are the things that we want to try and sell the advert in that will draw in the right type of leads for you. Now, when you are marketing the property in a way, just as you're concerned about maybe finding bad tenants, they're also concerned about finding bad landlords and bad agents. So you need to do what you can to put people's mind at ease that you're a good landlord and the property that you'll have available would probably be a good fit for them. So for example, if you have any accreditations, you have any memberships, it might be the National Landlord Residential Landlords Association. It might be, for example, locally in Birmingham, we have the Midlands Landlord Accreditation Scheme. Any of these type of memberships or accreditations that you have, list those as well. It just goes towards showing that you are a professional landlord, and if your deposits are if you can take deposits, you should register in one of the schemes, talk about it being registered in one of the government schemes. Of course, this gives people confidence that who they're talking to and who they're going to be working with potentially is going to be somebody that's more open, honest, trustworthy, and has some track record as well. And finally, on this section, when you start getting those leads coming in, ideally, if possible, particularly if you've got more than one property, think about having a separate phone number and a separate email address, because as this business starts to grow, what will happen is ideally you want to take somebody on who can help with that, and you can pass that phone to them to deal with sometimes. For example, might be maintenance or other things as well. And even with the emails, you might be able to have somebody else logging into those for you. So if it's a separate ones right from the offset, it just makes it so much easier. Now that you've got the marketing machine working, all those leads are going to start coming through. So before we start talking about the next step of those individual leads, if you're enjoying this content, then make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and enable the notification bell as well. That means you'll get notified when these videos are shared. And we've got some amazing content planned for 2021, so make sure you don't miss out on any of that. Now that those leads are coming through, what we want to do is have a conversation with those individual leads. I know some people prefer to send them through a website, fill out a form, come through that way, but really this is about people and it's a people business. So I believe it's important that we're having those conversations rather than relying just on forms. And I'm a big fan of tech and using systems and processes, but remember, you have to have a human element to your business as well, because hey, the whole video is about finding the best possible tenants, right? And that's what we want to be able to do. So when we have a conversation, remember, some people will try and avoid having a conversation. So who am I talking about? Well, some of the younger people, and I'm thinking of my kids, they prefer to message you rather than call you and have a conversation. So we have to be mindful that some people are a little bit more resistant than picking up the phone and having a conversation with you straight away. So we need to encourage them and invite them into a conversation if, for example, they're answering the call to you. So they might ask some questions by text message, for example, or WhatsApp, and what you want to do is be able to respond to those, but ideally get them onto a call as soon as possible, because that's really where you're going to be able to have a conversation and really understand if they're suitable. And what we want to be able to do is find out what is it they're looking for, be able to tell them what we want so we can determine if they're the right person to take them to the next step. And the way we do that and the way we follow this process is, first of all, we ask some questions around what is it that they're looking for, what's important for them. So for instance, some of the questions that we like to ask is, tell me, what is it you're looking for in a new home? And so these are open-ended questions. We're trying to encourage people to talk and tell us about what is it that they're ultimately looking for, because what I'm doing, or what you would be doing, is listening out for what we have available. Is that going to be a good fit for what they actually want? Other questions we want to ask is understanding why is it that they're looking to move. Now this is quite a telling question, so a nicer way to put this is, tell me, what's got you thinking about moving? So what this does, it invites the other person to open up and tell them a little bit more about their circumstance, their situation, because there's anything untoward going on you want to know. For example, if they've been evicted this morning and need to find a new place, you want to probably know that, right? So you can make a decision whether they are or probably aren't going to be suitable for you as a potential tenant. So these are the sort of questions we want to ask. Other useful bits of information will be things like, whether they have any pets, what is it they do work-wise, where is it that they actually work as well. So you want to try and engage, is this actually practical? So for example, sometimes people ring up on some of our cheaper properties that we have available, and we ask them about what they do for work and where they work, and they work 15 miles away, and the only reason they rang up because it's a cheap property. The reality is, once they realize exactly where it is and how long it's going to take them to get to work, it's very unlikely that's going to go anywhere. So part of the vetting process is for you to cherry pick out the best possible leads, but also to try and filter out those ones that are not really going to go anywhere, and you're going to be essentially your tire kickers that are just going to waste your time and it's not going to be right. So this is the stage where we want to be able to do that. Other questions that you'll want to ask is, who is it that'll be living at the property? So you want to try and get a gauge for, is it going to be a good fit? So for example, if you've got a 1-bedroom flat and it's a family of 5 that are looking to move in, probably is not going to work. And then on the other hand, if you've got a 5-bedroom house and it's one individual looking to move in just for himself, that's probably not going to be a good fit either. So these are kind of things that might set off alarm bells, and you want to be able to vet earlier on if it's going to be suitable for them. Now, as we're doing this, for example, age is also important, how old somebody is. And the reason we tend to ask this, particularly in our rooms in the shared houses, we're trying to get a gauge that we have similar age people in the same house. So for example, if you've got a 22-year-old with a 60-year-old in the same house, that probably is not going to work either. But of course, if somebody is under 25, what we like to do is ensure that they have a guarantor. So these are the kind of questions we ask earlier on, because they're probably still quite early in their journey, and I'm not saying everybody is necessarily the same, but sometimes they may not be as experienced in life yet and managing money, and so that way it just gives us an extra bit of reassurance if they have a guarantor available. And this is of course another way for you to protect your asset and your income by having somebody else that's going to be responsible for that individual as well, rather than just the individual on their own. And as we're doing these questions, what we're trying to do is work out whether they're going to be the right type of person for the property. Now, if you put yourselves in their shoes, when they ring up, there's 2 types of questions they will ask. They will either ask if the property is still available and can they view it, or they might ask some questions around the property, or sometimes even you get a 3rd type of question where they ask a specific question to see if it's going to be suitable. For example, do you need a deposit? Do you accept pets? Do you take DSS? These are type of questions that people might ask because they're thinking they want to know that first before they go any further. So of course, your conversation isn't necessarily going to be structured and managed in the way that I've just suggested. Oftentimes it might be that they have some questions that want to be answered as well. And remember, the whole purpose of this vetting stage is for you to be able to share what you're looking for and them to be able to tell you what they're looking for and see if it's going to be a good fit so that you can take it to the next stage. Now, let's say during this conversation, they've said certain things and you're thinking, this is not right for me, we don't particularly want this type of tenant, then how do you kind of politely exit out of that? Well, of course, third party is always the best way to do that by saying that what you're doing right now is collating that information and you'll be passing it on to partner, decision maker, whatever it might be, and then they'll get back to you if it's something that they'll be looking to take further. And so what the other person understands, the person calling up, that you're really right now just collecting the leads together, and then you'll decide who it is that you're doing viewings with. So that's an easy way to kind of exit out of that. On the other hand, if you decide it is going to be the right type of person, and it's somebody you do want to take to the next stage, then you want to be able to tell them a little bit more about your requirements or what it is that you're going to be looking for. So for example, that means you might be taking a deposit, and remember, it's only 5 weeks deposit you can now take, so no more than that. And it may be that you've got certain process and things that you want as well. We're going to talk about the referencing stage in a few moments, so make sure you watch the video to the end, because I've got another little tip for you at the very end, which is slightly different. The third stage of this process now is the actual viewing itself. So when you get to the tenants over to view the property, as you're booking these viewings, one thing I'd encourage you to do if possible is to do them back to back. Now I know some people like the idea of block viewings, but I think with block viewings is you get too many people in the property at the same time, although it creates that scarcity. Oh my God, there's lots of other people looking, we better make a decision quickly. But what it means is you are not in a position to have individual conversations. And remember, a lot of what I'm talking about is about vetting and finding the best tenants. So how do you do that in that situation? So you want to be able to spend a little bit of time with each of the people that are coming around the property. And if you've got people literally queuing up outside for 15-minute viewing, then that serves the same purpose as well in terms of that scarcity effect, that there are other people waiting to view. And of course, when you're booking the appointment, you can let people know that there'll be other people that'll be viewing after them as well. And so what that means is the person that's viewing knows that there's other people looking. It's not that they're the only one looking at this potential property. Now, one of the challenges that around viewings is that the show-up rate can be quite appalling, that some people book the viewing and they don't actually show up. So one of the ways we minimize those no-shows, as it were, is by a number of follow-ups. So one of the first ones is we text them out the information as a text and an email as well for all the details about who's going to meet them at the property, etc. And of course, during COVID, we've got to give them some information about how the viewing is going to work, because that might be a little bit different to how it used to be before. So we send them all that information across, we text it as well. But we also let them know that we'll be calling them on the day beforehand just to confirm before we actually set off towards the property. And if they don't answer or we're not able to speak to them, then we won't continue with the appointment, we won't do the appointment. So what that does, it also ensures the person realizes that if we don't speak to them, we won't turn up at the property. Now, very occasionally you'll get people that don't read emails, you know the kind of people I mean, right? And so what happens is they'll not answer the call, and they'll ring you from the property and say, I'm at the property, I'm waiting for the viewing, there's nobody here. Now that happens occasionally, you'll get that. That's because they didn't respond to the phone call and the person who's doing the viewing didn't go out. But all these things help minimize your no-show, and it minimizes the time wastage that you might have at the property. So remember, it's like a filtration stage that's happening. So at the first stage, we shorten it down to who we think is going to be suitable. Now we're at the property to show them around. So let's say now you're at the property and you're going to show them the property. First thing you need to do is get there before everybody else. So you need to get there about 5 or 10 minutes early, and you need to do a few things to ensure that the property is going to be presentable for them to come and have a look at. So for example, if there's any post and junk mail, pick all that up, tidy it up. If there's any junk mail, throw it away. If there's any important post, make sure you put that aside to take with you and to deal with. And you want to make sure if it's a warm day, the windows are open so it's nice and airy. And if it's a cold day, then get the heating on as well so the property feels nice and warm. Some nice smells and whether it's air fresheners or whatever it is. So just so that you've got some nice ambience in the property when you get people coming through. Because remember, people make decisions very, very quickly in an instant, and those first impressions really count. So what you want to do is present the property in its best possible light. Now, of course, they've been sold on the photographs and what you wrote about the property earlier on. This is where it's important that this is accurate. Now, again, this is where sometimes agents get a bad rap, because when the tenant turns up to view the property, it looks nothing like the photographs, or it's been exaggerated in such a way that actually it's not really representative. So what you want to happen at this stage is, if your first stage of marketing was right, you attracted the right type of tenants. Your second stage, you vetted the right type of people that you want to show the property. This third stage should really just be a confirmation for the tenant or the potential tenant, as they come and look at the property. They're confirming to themselves that this is what they think it is and what they've seen in the photographs, the videos, the floor plan layout, etc., etc. So now this is almost just an affirmation for them at this stage, and that's what you want to be able to do. Now, when you're going around the property, you're showing them the property, you want to be still having a conversation, you want to maintain that rapport, you want to go over some of the questions you asked about before. So tell me about work, this is going to, location-wise, how that's going to work for you, the family that's going to be living here, schools nearby, etc. All these things to build some nice rapport. And what that does, in the conversation, you get a real sense for the person, what type of person it might be that you're potentially going to have as a tenant in this property. And remember, at this stage, you still haven't committed to allowing them to be your tenant, but what you're still doing is you're filtering and you're vetting. So during the time that you're showing them around the property, you want to be maintaining that conversation, building that rapport, but also be doing what I call test closing questions. Test closing questions are, before you actually try and close a deal, you're testing to see, is this suitable? So a great question as a test close could be, for example, could you see yourself living here? Now, what that means is you take them into an emotional state about how they feel about living in this particular property. And also, when they're walking around, they'll sometimes give you little clues. If you look out for the body language, for instance, they'll be working out, this is where the sofa would go, the TV would go here, etc. So they're already thinking about how it would be for them to live in that particular property. So these things will help you and give you signals about whether it is right for them, because remember, just as you're trying to choose them, they're trying to choose you too. So finally, before we wrap up on this stage, what you want to do is, if it's right for them, you want to move to a stage where you start taking some details. Ask the potential tenants that's viewing the property, what is it that they like most about that property? And also that means they give you some positive feedback. But then of course, if it's a case of you're thinking this is the type of tenant you want to ask them, do they have any other questions, or are they ready to move to the next stage? Now that you've found the right applicant that you want to take forward as a potential tenant, we move to the fourth and final stage, which is processing of the application. Now, the first thing we want to do is get the individual to commit to the property by paying a holding fee. Now remember, you can no longer charge fees of any sort, so this holding fee is really a part payment of a deposit to be able to progress the application next day, just to ensure that they're serious, and it also means that they're committed, they're less likely to waste your time, and also they can get the paperwork to you. So what paperwork is it that you need and that you should ask for? Now sometimes referencing, as it's also known as, can be seen as a bit of a dark art. The reality is it isn't actually that complicated. However, this is where many fall out of bed and don't progress to the next stage, because the individual tenants either can't provide all the information, or once they have provided the information, you look at it and you think, this is not what I thought it was, and decide not to proceed with it. So this stage, you still got to make sure you keep your options open. You don't shut the door to any more leads. You keep those leads coming through whilst you're vetting this particular application. Now, when we say put out referencing as a full referencing to a traditional agent, I say a traditional agent because it's not the way we do it in our agencies, but most agencies, when we talk about a full reference, what they tend to do, they do a credit check. They'll do a check on the bank account to make sure the account numbers are genuine and they exist. They'll do a landlord check with their current landlord. They'll do an employer check. So these are a few checks they do on a full reference. But the problem with this is many don't do it as well as they should. So we tend to take most of this in-house. What we do is the credit check, and there's many different places you can get a credit check done, literally for a few pounds, as long as you've got consent from the applicant, and you just want to know if they've got any CCJs, they've got any poor management of money that you need to be aware of, any credit history problems. And this will also, it's a good indicator if somebody's had recent money management problems, that they might fall into difficulty going forward, because look, let's face it, if you're renting my property for £500 and it's for a year, that's £6,000 of effectively credit that you're offering them. So you need to be comfortable that they're going to be able to pay this. And one of the key things that we look for is 3 months of bank statements. And in those bank statements, what we're looking for is their income. We want to see their income is what they told us and is consistently coming in. And the second thing we're looking for is their rent payments, that they are making those regularly and on time as it's stated in their tenancy agreement. This tells you a lot. Now many people don't do this, and I think it's so easy to be able to help and pick out the best possible tenants. Also, if there's going to be a guarantor, you want to make sure that you've checked out the guarantor in the same way with their ID as well. And if they own a property, which is what we ask for, that they're a homeowner. And that means, look, they're less likely to do a disappearing trick on you, that they've got a property. It means they're much more stable in terms of in their life where they are financially as well. So if there's ever a problem, you can resort to the guarantor rather than the tenant disappearing owing rent and the guarantor disappearing as well. So you're going to just vet the guarantor a little bit. So you want to collect some basic documents. Sometimes you might have an application form. We have quite a comprehensive application form that we go through. Now you've collated all this information, you've got their IDs, you need to do various things like right to rent checks to make sure they're legally allowed to rent in this country. So the government has now also made us immigration officers as well. That's also part of our responsibility as landlords and letting agents when we have somebody coming into the property. So you're collating all this information, and one of the things that you might do is ring the landlord, their current landlord, to get a reference. This is the most common thing. However, although that is useful to do, what I'd encourage you to do is contact the previous landlord, because the current landlord, let's say they may not be that happy with them and they just want to see them move on, and let's say they might not be entirely honest with their reference. I'm not saying everybody's the same, but it increases the chances of there being some poor quality information coming through, let's say. And so by speaking to their previous landlord, who they are no longer a tenant with, means you're probably likely to get more honest information. So this application process is, we have quite a comprehensive process, but really we do all of it in-house. We really look through and vet the paperwork to make sure that they're going to be a good fit. Because remember, as I said, some of them won't proceed to the next stage. And if this stuff is making sense and you're enjoying it, make sure you hit that and smash that like button even, subscribe to the channel and have that notification bell enabled so that you're seeing more of this content. Now those are the 4 stages I've just talked about in terms of finding the best possible tenants. But really what we do in our business, we have 3 different teams, if you like, that will speak to an individual before we make a decision. The first person that they speak to on the phone, the second one will be the person doing the viewing of the property. The third one that will be reviewing the application. So you'll have at least 3 people that will speak to that individual. This gives us a multiple gauge of people communicating with them to get a feel for what they're going to be like as a tenant. And this also helps in part of our decision-making process, so it's not purely on black and white information that we see, which unfortunately how some agencies work. And hey, look, if you've got property in Birmingham and you want help with either letting or management, make sure you reach out to us. We do things in a very different way, as you've seen in the way I've shared this information. Very few agents follow a process like this, but of course, if you want to do it yourself, then these tips should certainly help you. And I'll be doing a lot more content around this year, so make sure you look out for that as well. And let us know what it is that you do when you look for tenants, and if there's anything different you do, make sure you put it in the comment section, because hey, I'm always open to learning. I'm interested to see what other people do to find the best possible tenants. That just leaves me to say thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next video.